Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I have a very interesting video, I hope, for you, looking at this knife model here in particular. This is the Grimsmo Knives Norseman. As many of you may know, this is a knife that I've loved for a long time. I had one for a long time, I got an offer I couldn't refuse, and then I got another offer for one that I couldn't refuse either, and so I have this new one here. But this is, the Grimsmo Knives in many ways has been sort of a storybook success in the knife world. These are two guys, John and Eric Grimsmo, started off in their garage with a little CNC mill, and then, gradually acquired more and more machines, more and more parts, more and more expertise and knowledge. And throughout their life, they've been putting out these really incredible pieces. First, the Norsemen, and then they made a second model, the Rask. This little guy right here. But they have gone through a lot of change. They now have their own shop. They now have, big professional quality CNC mill and lathe. They're now hiring additional employees. I mean, they are an incredible success story. And a lot of people feel a much more intimate connection to their success because they've done a lot of it via social media. They've got a YouTube channel, which you should absolutely check out. And so you've been able to watch these folks grow and grow and grow throughout time. And that's been really kind of neat. I'm a big fan of that process of seeing all that. But the problem is that it's very difficult over the course of 4 or 5 years to kind of get a sense of how far they've come without a point of comparison. This little guy right here is the Norseman I now own, I'm delighted to say. This is Norseman 821. It is a very recent knife. It was made in December of 2017, I believe. And we'll confirm that in a second here. I'm just forgetting. But this is a very recent knife. It's kind of representing their cutting edge on the Norseman world. They're just hitting 1,000 of these guys that they've made. The one I had previously was right at the edge. Before they moved to the new mill and the new shop, one of the last ones there. And then the problem is I've never really got the chance to play with one that's really, really older school. From way, way back when. But today that's actually changed, thanks to my good buddy Sid. He loaned his everyday carry Norseman to me. He is, by the way, a collector of... Well, he's got a lot of Norsemen. He's got a bunch of Rasks. I believe he's got about like 1% of the knives, maybe a little bit more at this point, that Grimsmo Knives has ever made. So he is a very dedicated fan of theirs. And he sent this little guy along, which is his everyday carry knife, the one that goes in his pocket when he's got a choice. And it's a really interesting knife for a bunch of reasons. To start with, it's inlaid. You can see here there is carbon fiber in this guy, and that's something that's really unusual. There aren't that many inlaid Norsemans out there at all. But it's also a very early knife. You can see here, this is number 137. That is much, much older. And so the two of these knives being together on my table, which is a very rare thing to have two Norsemans on a table, well, unless you said, but it's a very rare thing anyways. But to have two from these very, very different time frames is a really, really neat thing. So today what I want to do is just talk a little bit about some of the differences that are present between this brand new one and this old one that show advancement over time. And so let's go ahead and jump into it. Now, to start with, the scales, the handle part is very different in a number of ways. Here, I'll put the blades away for a second. The scales here show some major differences. I mean, the honeycomb versus inlay, obviously, that's a choice, though. But you get things like, for instance, the front of the handle here. On the older Norsemans, you actually had this little ridge, kind of hollow cut in there. And, I don't entirely understand it. It could be an aesthetic thing, but it also, some makers have used that as a pinch cut sort of affordance, so that it makes it a little bit easier to come in and do a cut like this, whereas on mine, it's just flat, and I believe that was the case on my last Norseman as well, which means it's a little tough to do the pinch cut, but, well, whatever. Not a big deal there. In fact, all of these changes are relatively small, and I'm not going to highlight all the ways in which they're similar, because they're the same knife model at some very real level. But anyways, there are other major differences, too. For instance, the lock bar area here. If we take a look, I'll try and zoom in a little bit. Yeah, there we go. You can see that on mine, there's still this kind of trademark, I don't know if it's trademark, but still there's this up and down pattern to the lock bar, which I find to be pretty interesting and different. But here, there's actually a little bit extra room around the pivot here. This could be an affordance just for the inlay to allow a little bit more depth there, and then it's cut out here. Or it could be an age thing. If you've got an older Norseman, let me know. But the lock bar geometry, the lock bar shaping here is very different. The lock bar geometry in terms of where it touches looks relatively similar, although this one goes into this looks like it's got more engagement all around. You can see here the blade is really the lock bar is really surrounded by blade, whereas here it's more or less just touching. So that's an interesting set of differences. Lanyard holes are actually a little bit different here in that the lanyard hole on the older one is a little bit bigger. Or maybe it's a wider chamfer. I'm not exactly sure, but you can see here they are a little different in that domain. You also get some very slight differences in the finger grooves here. Part of this, again, could be due to the inlay work, but at the same time, you can see there's a much deeper sort of chamfer or angle cut out here. And you can also see there's a little bit of CNC chatter right here on this guy, a little bit of unevenness, whereas on this guy, that's not there. These are little tiny details. I mean, both of these knives, I think, could qualify as gem in my world, but these little tiny details that are being refined over time is something that John Grimsmo talks a lot about on his channel, and something I respect deeply, that he's willing to chase down every last little thing like that. And then finally, on the clip side, these are actually a little bit different. You can see here, let me move things around so you can get that into frame, but you can see here that the clip on this guy is actually smaller. I mean, it's a little bit more rounded off. I don't know whether it's the case that this spent a little more time on a sander, maybe to knock down some of the sharper edges here, or maybe there was actually a different design CNC-wise in the clip. I mean, on this dimension, the clips are pretty much identical, but on this dimension, they are different, and that's something that's a little bit interesting. You get a little more flair here. Here, it seems maybe I don't know. So either way, that's a little thing, but it's a thing. More differences are apparent on the blades, actually. So, I mean, obviously, one big difference is that this guy has an acid wash applied to it, as some variety of a darker finish. I don't think it's a DLC. But this guy has a finish, this one doesn't. But if we put that aside, we can see things like, for instance, this guy actually has a fair amount of sharpening wear. This came used to my buddy Sid, and but you can see here that the little tip here on this little tiny edge is rounded off a good deal more than it is on this guy, where there's still a very distinct sharp line there. What that means is that probably at some point in time in the knife's history, it was sharpened, and whoever did that sharpening, and could have been sharpened by multiple people, but one of the people who did that sharpening was kind of treated this as one continuous blade, and that'll round off this little line here. It's fine, you know, and as a user, it doesn't matter, but it is definitely a thing. You can also see some major changes in angle as you get up towards the tip on this guy, whereas on this guy, it's a little bit shallower throughout. Again, not a big deal. Functionally speaking, they're both fine. They both cut things very nicely, but yeah, there you go. So yeah, that could have been from the Grimsmos, but I kind of suspect it was a sharpening thing. A couple of other differences that we'll see here. Look right in this area right up front here. What we can see is that there are, on this guy, one of the things that makes the Norseman unique is that they've used the CNC to do the blade grinding, and they've left these obvious lines here. There we go. It left those obvious lines there that show kind of each layer of CNC cut. And that gives it, although it doesn't provide much, if anything, in the way of resistance to the blade, it definitely gives it a look that's pretty distinctive. Whereas on this guy, it's the same thing, but if we look at the tip here, we can see that there's actually much bigger step size. I'll try and put these guys right next to each other in the frame here. On this guy, you can see the steps are much more uniform, whereas on this guy, the steps start out bigger and then get smaller. I can understand that from a perspective of, you know, just wanting to hog out more material quickly, but yeah. You can also see subtle differences in the grind. This guy is... This guy has, I'm sorry, the new one here has a little bit more rounding, has a little bit more of a flat portion at the tip there for this grind. I can try and point, but I got both hands full of knife at the moment, but there's a little bit of a flat portion that I'm pointing to there, whereas on this guy, not so much. You can also see subtle differences in the overall shape of the blade front, but again, some of that could be attributable to sharpening over time. So that's kind of an interesting thing. The fact that they've changed the step size to make that more uniform, it doesn't matter, but it's absolutely kind of cool. You can see that the thumb stud is very slightly taller. It doesn't seem like a whole lot, but it is on the new guy. That's definitely a thing, and frankly, that is a helpful thing, because this has a nice strong detent, and so you want that thumb stud to give you plenty of purchase there. And then finally, actually the lettering on this guy. I'll see if I can kind of hold these in together closely. I need an extra hand here. But if we look at the RWL 34 or the 137, you can see he's using a much finer end mill on the new guy here. So you get much more distinct lettering here. not a little, or I'm sorry, not really important, but kind of cool nonetheless. And so the blades show a lot of difference, and even the heel of the blade. If we take a look here, there is a lot more contour to the heel of the blade. And again, some of this could be due to sharpening wear over time, but, you know, if this was really aggressively sharpened, you could see that pull back, but it could also just be the nature of the beast here. But you can see the transition between the flipper tab and otherwise is a little bit different here. And actually, the flipper tab is a little bit longer on the new ones as well, as we can see here. It's not by a huge margin, but it's definitely there. So that's kind of interesting. Then the other domain on the externality side that is interesting are the fasteners. You can see here a couple of differences. One of the big ones being that the pivot screws are actually differently sized. The pivot screw on the new ones are bigger than the pivot screws on the old ones, which is, you know, fine. It's interesting, and in fact, this is a difference relative to my my last Norseman that you saw on the channel. You'll also see that the other screws are different as well. This guy is using T10 all throughout, or the T10 in the back here, whereas this guy's using T9. But you can also see that here we're using, on the new one, Grimsmos have actually used their new fancy CNC lathe to make all of the screws for the knives as well. Whereas this guy, I don't know if these were out of box, shop made, but I believe they were out of box. And so you can see that the Grimsmo screws have those little dots around it there. And by the way, that's an interesting authenticity test for a Grimsmo, although there aren't really authenticity issues with Grimsmos yet. But nonetheless, you know, if it's over, say, like 500 or so, it's probably going to have those little dots around the screws indicating they're house-made screws. So those little kind of details are interesting, and even the pivot screw, by the way, is different. Here it's a long, flat screw, giving the knife a flatter overall profile, although the inlay kind of complicates things, whereas on this guy, it's a little bit more domed. So interesting, very interesting, at least to a nerd like me. But the thing is, some of the changes actually require us to go a little bit deeper. So we're going to use a little bit of movie magic here to disassemble these knives so we can take a look inside. All right, ready? Here we go. 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 Bam! Okay, so we got these knives apart here, and so we can take a look at the inside and see some of the differences that are present there. First off, actually, one of the things that's kind of interesting is that they've changed some of the engravings on the inside here. I mean, some of them you would expect to change. For instance, the date marks. Here we can see that this guy was made in December 2017. This guy was made in September of 2013. So that's a big old difference here. I mean, 4 years worth of difference is impressive here. Yeah, that adds up to 4, right? Okay. Either way, so that's kind of cool. Just to see, and frankly, this is a reason I always advocate putting, you know, a date mark inside your knives. I think it's a cool little detail, and for somebody who is a gigantic nerd and a historian of knives down the road, it could absolutely be a nice little thing. A couple of other things to highlight here. They've both got the lock bar stabilizer at this point, although this one has a very, very little tiny bit of engraving there, which I can't quite read necessarily. I mean, this says Hinderer LBS on one side, then the other one I think might say Grimsmo, but it's hard to say for sure. I mean, seriously, that's really, that's tough to read. But we can see some other nice little details here, part of which is that, you actually get a difference in the bearings here. On this side, we're getting ceramic bearings, whereas on this side, we're getting steel bearings. This is a difference that, honestly, I don't know makes a difference. In fact, I've changed the knives for ceramic on some knives, I've changed the bearings from steel to ceramic on some knives, and I've never really noticed, like, a substantial, oh my God, wow, that's different thing. And so, you know, I don't really care that much that they made that change, but it is always nice. It's something I always like to see, and especially on the higher end. There's no real disadvantage to ceramics, so it's good to see people doing that well. Other differences in the engravings. You can see, for instance, that they've changed the nature of the little the Norse guy. I don't know, a Norse dude, whatever he's called in the middle there. In this guy, originally he came with just the helmet, and in this case, now he's got the knives behind him as well, which is kind of a neat little detail. And then one other thing that they've added in here is a proudly made in Canada symbol that is not present on the early one. They were all made in Canada, by the way, but I guess they weren't proud about it until, no, I don't know. But either way, it's kind of a neat little detail, and you can see, I mean, seriously, look at the machining on the maple leaf there. That's kind of awesome. I'm a fan of that. One other thing I'll highlight real quick is we're highlighting minutia. is that look at the edges of these backspaces. These are what are called shouldered backspaces, which not only are the backspaces slightly larger on the new Norseman here, but the little rim around them, the shoulder on them, is it's a little bit more prominent on the new ones. That's actually really nice, because having a shouldered backspacer means that everything kind of snaps into place and then you screw it in place. As opposed to if this were just a flat surface on the top there, it would be a lot harder to do that because, you'd have to kind of adjust the scales back and forth until everything was in perfect alignment. So the fact that they're not only continuing to use shouldered back spaces, but the fact that they're improving that shoulder a little bit is kind of a nice little detail. Speaking of nice little details, one of the big differences between the early and the later Norsemen is actually the stop pin. Take a look at this. This guy has a single stop pin, whereas these guys have two stop pins. The reason for having the two stop pins, and I'll try and simulate here using this blade, is that one of the stop pins, the bigger of the two, is what engages with the knife when the blade is locked open. The other of the stop pins is what stops the knife from hitting the backspaces when it's closed. And so by having those two different stop pins in there, you're able to tune a little bit better both the open and the closed action of the knife. By subtly changing the dimensions of this guy, they are able to really tune that lockup very carefully, and they're able to make a lockup that's maybe a little bit more secure, not secure, I'm sorry, they're able to make it close in just an optimal way, whereas had they had a much bigger pin, they'd need a much bigger hole, etc. So by using these two, they're able to do that. As opposed to on this guy, where they're using the single stop pin. Now, don't get me wrong, is this like a crucial feature? No, absolutely not. But they're able to just do that with two, and then they've got a whole video on that. So that's kind of a nice thing. I'd never seen one of these guys without the two pins. That's kind of a trademark of theirs, and so it's neat to see. So that's a major difference. One thing that I love seeing, and that, it shouldn't surprise me at all, and doesn't, frankly, but check this out. This is an acid etched, some kind of a washed blade, but the thing is, they have gone ahead and they've masked off the surface where the bearings glide and where the detent ball, that is gliding along the top there. That's a nice little detail, because what that means is that this will have a perfectly smooth action even though it's DLC. Very often, especially lazier manufacturers, if they do like an acid wash or a DLC blade, they won't bother with that, and then you'll get all the grit of the little detent ball running up and down, up and down, up and down on that blade. It's just not great. As you hit all little grooves, you can see both of them have the flattened detent ball, which is one of the reasons their actions are so great. I mean, look, inside, they're very, very similar knives, but they're both very, very good knives. So, there you go. That's the inside of these guys. Very, very interesting to see. So let's go on ahead and stitch these guys back together using some movie magic. And, yeah, hopefully this interior part has been interesting. All right, ready? Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Movie magic time. And bam. Okay. So, final conclusion-wise, two big things jump out at me. First off, it is amazing how many little changes have been made here. It would have been very, very easy for the Grimsmos to sort of go on autopilot after a certain point. They've got a knife that's incredible. And it really is. This is a great knife over here. And then just to say, you know what? Yeah, we're done. We'll just keep making them. And making them and making them and making them. And just kind of cranking out the same things over and over again. And not addressing the little issues. Not fixing the little bits of chatter. Not fixing the little tiny... And not improving things. Not trying to make anything better or different. But the simple fact is that they haven't. Every one of these guys is... incorporating, well, I don't know, every one. I mean, you can watch his channel to learn more about that. But they really are making a lot of little tiny changes each time, a kind of continuous improvement thing. And in a lot of ways, that to me is what's missing from a lot of modern high-end knife making, especially from these limited edition sorts of runs. You get, I'm not going to name names here because it's tacky, but you get a lot of companies out there who do like, one run of 300 of a knife and then move on to the next thing, then the next thing, then the next thing. The problem is, yeah, if that 300 is really good, then yeah, you got a really good knife. But if it's not a good 300 knives, then you're going to have, there's nothing that can be changed. Whereas when you do this kind of a long-term run of this iterative process and you make little tweaks every time to make each one better and better and better, then the knives get better and better and better. And as a result, you can end up with something that goes from really, really good to pretty pretty much perfect, at least if you're looking for this kind of sharp and spoon style knife. So, you know, at that level, I really applaud that they didn't just rest on their laurels and just keep making the same damn knife over and over and over again. They work to improve things. But at another level, it's amazing how little has been changed, because that means that the original design was very good. The fact that they were here very early in the run and then 4 years later were only needing to go here. This is still a great knife, and this is a great knife. And substantially, yeah, there are some improvements here, but it's not like it's not curved diminishing returns kinds of stuff. And that really does speak to the quality of the original design. I actually handled the very first prototype Norseman way back when at the Blade Show. If you watch one of John and Grimsmo's Blade Show videos, I give a mini review of it. But anyways, I think it was video number 3 of theirs? I don't know, whatever, from 2017. But whatever. That one definitely had a lot of improvements, or needed a lot of improvements, but this is a really great knife, and so is this one. And so I respect the fact that they got so many things right so early that they've managed to, you know, make these pretty solid. And so, you know, at that level, this has been a really, at least interesting thing to me. And, you know, I want to just highlight, and I wanted to highlight, the fact that even if you're making substantially the same knife, you can make that knife better and better and better over time, and it will show, at least to people who are detail obsessed. And when you're selling this much money, I mean, this knife is now going for like $925, $950. When you're going with that much money, you do need to keep making those improvements, and you can't sit still, or else you're really going to fall behind, and it's going to look really ugly. So anyways, there you go. I hope this is interesting. Sid, thank you so much for loaning your everyday carry to me. This is a great little knife. Love handling one with the inlays here. Heck of a knife, and yeah, this one is too. So anyways, hope this has been interesting to you. Have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.